In this video, we're going to carry on with our Subaru WRX form in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to take care of some of the little bits and pieces that we sort of left as we progress to make the bigger shape of this front end of a Subaru WRX. Now, as I mentioned very early on, we're not going to model the entire car, we're not even going to get all the details right, but I felt it was important to go at a challenge like this to make sure that we understand the tools that we're using and how we can apply them. At this point, we've only really used a handful of tools. Obviously, Edit Form, which has been an extremely important tool. And we've also taken a look at using Insert Edge and Insert Point. We've merged Edge, we've used Bridge, we've tried Fill Hole, and we've also welded vertices. We've creased and uncreased edges, and we've also taken a look at sliding edges around. But other than that, we haven't really touched on 50% or more of the tools in here. And a lot of the tools are very helpful, but they are very specific. For example, the Straighten tool allows us to select a set of edges and we can put them closer to align. Now, this is great if you're bringing in a model or if you've made some changes that you don't really know how to undo, but we were very intentional in the edges that we created. If we take a look at this from the top, for example, you can see here that all of our lines are very smooth and we haven't really made the mistake or we haven't really gotten into the trap of making those drastic changes that we couldn't undo. However, there are still some things that I left unfinished and I wanted to come back. And for example, this corner here, we really need to address this corner because it just doesn't look right. There are a couple ways that we can do this. And when we talk about this car, obviously we don't have a top-down view, but essentially what happens is it's going to come from about this vertex and it's going to start curving back to about this vertex. Are a couple ways that we could try to fix this. The first way that I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to double click on this edge and I'm going to delete it. Now, deleting it unfortunately doesn't fix it. You can see that it gets closer to the right shape, but it's actually twisted and pinched it. So I'm going to use undo. I'm going to try to delete this one. And that actually gets us pretty close because we're controlling the transition here, and we're controlling it here, and then it's blending between. Now that we're closer, I'm going to go into Edit Form. I'm going to box select these edges, and I'm just going to pull them in a little bit. It's always important that we go back and forth between our box display and our smooth display because obviously these look very different. We want to ensure that our box display does look nice and smooth, and we want to make sure, for example, the angle of this intersection here is right. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to rotate this one just slightly. And then I want to take one of these vertices and I'm going to pull this back a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to pull this one back. Now, you'll remember very early on, we actually left some unfinished business in this area. We sort of ended at a triangular patch. And ultimately, that's probably okay. It might be something that we want to address. But right now, I'm okay with the way that this looks. But we do need to make sure that the transition up front is nice and smooth and it kind of gets away from us right here. So let's go back to that top view, rotate it if you want to. And you can see that we go from basically a straight line here and we continue on straight and then it sort of bumps out before it goes back in. Now that's something that we want to avoid. So I'm going to take this vertex, I'm going to bring it out a little bit. I'm going to take this one, I'm going to bring it out and pull it over. I'm going to do the same thing here. However, this time I'm going to grab this edge and pull it a little bit. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we have this wide section here, then we have a narrow section here and a narrow section here. And pulling this edge out allows me to widen that section up gradually. I'm going to take this vertex and I want to bring it over. I'm really trying to make sure that I have a nice transition. So I'll go back to a smooth display and that looks much better. It's still not perfect. It still kind of flares in a bit too much for my liking over here, but it's something that I can work with. I'm okay with it right now. And I think I want to actually take this edge. I'm going to go to a front view to do this. I'm going to take this edge and try to bring it out a little bit. And we might need to do it by grabbing a vertex, maybe bringing this back in, And the reason that I want to do this is because I want it to flare out just as it gets to that wheel arch. So now if we take a look at this and we zoom out a bit, you can see that it's starting to flare out as it gets to that wheel arch, and that's something you would more commonly see. Remember also that when we look at this design, if we bring back our front canvas, we have really only gone to a cosmetic seam in the top edge of the bumper. There's a lot more that can be done down here, and you can certainly spend the time with the tools that we've learned to continue to model this front end. I think it's a great challenge, and it's something that allows you to have some customization, some flexibility in the design. We are not going to go down that path. We're not going to be modeling all these little details because honestly, it's really a repeat of everything that we've done. And the process is not very fun to watch. When you're modeling something in this method, it takes a lot of time. And I know I've said that over and over again. It takes a lot of time, but it's something that you really need to spend the time with in order to get right. The next thing that I want to work on and fix is this area around the headlight opening. If we go to a smooth display, you can see how it starts to roll in around that headlight. And if we go back to a box display, we can see that we're tapering in there. So if that's the intention, if it actually tapers in right at the headlight, that's fine. This car does not. So I want to fix this, and I'm going to fix it by modifying the design slightly. And I might need to do this again from multiple views. So I'm going to need to go to a side view. I'm going to need to go to a front view. And I need to just simply pull these things out. Remember, when we're looking at it from the front, we're working in plane. And when we get to an area like this where we've got these two small lips coming together, we want to make sure that we move them together to preserve their orientation. I'm going to bring this one up and over. And then I'm going to take a look at this in smooth display, see if we've gotten rid of that little bump. There's still some stuff going on here that we can take care of, but we took care of most of that tapered in area. When we view it from the top, I'm going to grab this right here. I'm going to pull it out a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing. As you begin to play around with these tools, you'll need to begin identifying and understanding the decision-making process for what you're moving. For example, you'll notice that in this section, I've gone from moving edges and then I've gone to moving vertices. When we go from moving edges and vertices, the decision-making process generally comes down to if we are trying to maintain the orientation of an edge or if we are trying to smooth things out. Now, again, I'm working in box display and I'm not working in smooth display for some of this underlying changes. You'll notice that as I move this vertex, the shading on this edge changes. And that's because it's actually moving below. And we can kind of get the picture. We can kind of see that happening when we're moving things around. You can watch the transition of the light on those. So when we view it from the side, we want to be careful that it's not above other geometry. And it's going to be just a tricky thing. You're going to have to play around with it, going back and forth from smooth to box display until you're happy with the results. I'm pretty happy there. However, I don't really like this transition here. I don't like the way that this terminates. And you'll remember when we were attempting to do this with a crease, it just wasn't blending very well at the front. So in order to get around that, we came back and we added this edge here that was extremely close. Now, in order to get that sharp crease or that sharp edge, we likely need to do the same thing on the bottom as well. The problem is when we double click this edge, this does not allow us to create a single long transition. If we grab this, you'll notice that it sort of ends at these triangular patches. So it's something that we're going to have to do manually if we want to add that edge in. It's, again, another design decision, and it's something that we should play around with. So we're going to come to Insert Point. I'm going to do this from a right view, and I'm going to start at the back. So this is the edge that I want to mimic. So I'm going to start just below it. If you make a mistake, just make sure that you deselect and that you put this below the vertex. You don't want to actually attach it to the vertex, but what we want to do is we want to create an edge that is just below here so we can tighten up this crease. We're going to have to make a small triangle here, which is generally a bad idea, but let's just try it and let's see how it looks. And this will give us the ability to sort of move it up. Right? And then we're going to come over here. We're going to say okay. Now, instantly, that doesn't look like it did the job, but let's go ahead and use our Control or Command and the number 4 on the keyboard. And note that we did get that sharper crease, or we made that tiny triangle. We've got a problem that we need to address, but it does look like it did give us the result. It gave us that tight crease, and now we just have to figure out what happened in this area. So Control or Command 6 will bring that back. Going to box display mode is likely going to give us our answer. And you'll see what happened is we made a small triangle here. And that's not something that we really want to do. So I'm going to start by going to Modify. And note that this triangle, this vertex here should really attach here. So I'm going to use Weld Vertices, and I'm going to bring these two together. I'm going to say OK. And then we're going to go back to Smooth Display. And notice how that just does not terminate very well. So we'll go back and we'll try this again, noting that our two edges are really not coming together how we would intend them. So if we look at this from the side, you can see that we have sort of terminated right here. And that's the problem that we're running into. If we zoom out, you can see that we've got this sort of larger section here, and then we've got this extremely small section. So I'm going to select some of these, holding down Control or Command, working my way back, and I'm just going to delete them, making sure that I have complete control over that transition. So we'll go back to the smooth display. This looks a little bit better. Control or Command and the number 4. We have a little bit of a tighter crease there. We can push them closer together to get it tighter. But now the blend between the fender opening and this edge is much better. And that's really what we're hoping for. One thing that it's hard to control in a situation like this is the way that these shapes interact with the fender. Now, on the real car, what happens is as it gets close to the front edge where the headlight is, it sort of triangulates here and then fades away. And again, this is a very difficult thing to sort of address in Fusion, but we can try. We can use Edit Form, and we can bring some of these edges together. You notice that we have this triangle section, or we can tighten up the blend here. We can maybe have them come together as triangles. So if we try that, we can use things like Weld Vertices. We can try to put these two vertices together. We can try to put these two together. And then we've got them coming to a point. If we go to our smooth display, we'll say OK, Control or Command 4. You can see that the transition looks a little bit better, but it kind of falls apart here at the end. So Control Z, undo. I'm going to separate those back out, bring back my edges, and we'll try Control Z one more time. So this is telling me that really it's going to be very difficult. I probably would need to add additional edges on here to get that transition how I want. So all I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to just manually move some of these around to make that blend more gradual. And really what I want to get rid of is this crease that happens up here. And in order to get rid of that crease, again, this is going to have to be done from multiple views. I'm going to find where that crease is. And I want to make sure that this is a straight line. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a jog here, and that's fine. If we view this from the top, you can see that this one's slightly inset. I'm going to pull it out just a little bit. I'm going to pull this one in. And then again, if we view this from the right or the side, what we're looking to do here is we're looking to just bring everything in line. And when I say in line, having all of the different vertices have more of a strict line between all of them. So basically what I'm looking to do is get this to be more of a straight line. When we go back to my smooth display, that's already looking better. You can see that that triangle is starting to get pushed back a little bit, and we still have a little bit of a shadow here, and it's just going to take some time to work on. But I'm happier with that transition. It does need more work, obviously, but I am happier with it. And again, these little details, they can take a lot of time. You can sit here and you can literally spend hours and hours trying to fix them. And you'll notice that this small edge, I undid a little too far and I brought that edge back. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Go back to my smooth view, which again, We have Alt and the number 1 and Alt and the number 3, back and forth between box and smooth display. Control or Command 4 to get rid of those edges. Control or Command 6 to bring them back. So I'm pretty happy with the way that's looking. I'm happier with the transition around the fender. The last little tip that I want to give you before we end this video is that design decision that we made to crease this edge very early on. Now that's because it's much harder for us to control those really tightly packed edges. So when we look at those tightly packed edges, it's going to be a challenge, especially when you're designing a product, to control them. And I mentioned that we can come back and we can add them later. So at this point, let's try to do that. So I'm not entirely sure that this is going to work, but I'm going to double click on this edge. And the first thing that I want to see is that edge transitions all the way over to my fender. So this is the first good thing. Then I'm going to go to Modify and I'm going to go to Bevel Edge. When I go to Bevel Edge, we have the number of edges that we're going to add, and then we have the distance away, basically. So I'm going to set this as a very small number. Instead of 0.5, I'm going to set it at 0.05. When I do that and I say OK, essentially what I've done is I've put another creased edge there. And if I go back to smooth display, you can see that we've added that edge. It's sort of moved around. It's very tight in the front. But now we're going to go to Modify and we want to use Uncrease. I'm going to double click these edges to uncrease both of them and say OK. And then I'm going to use Control or Command 4 to get rid of the edge display. Now you'll see that that worked really well on the hood. I kept that smooth transition. Where it didn't work was down here where the shape sort of transitioned and it turned. And it also didn't work where it intersects the fender. So this method works okay in some instances, but as soon as it changed direction, it started to cause us problems. So I'm going to use Control Z, and I want to go back to the point where I just had that crease. I'm going to bring back my display edges, and again, I probably went back a little too far. I'm going to go to Redo. Yeah, let's try Redo one more time to the point where I fix that. You have to be careful with undo in here because it can be very easy to just go back a little too far. So that is the method that we can use to automatically insert an edge, and it doesn't have to be a crease. If we undo this crease, if we uncrease it, and then we go to Control or Command 4, you can see that we still have that style line there. It's just not as drastic. And you can see that it's sort of lost its edge up front. So Control Z brings that crease, and then if we redo, we get rid of that crease. You can see how it affects it. So we really need multiple edges. The best way to fix this is to do it manually, unfortunately. So you have to manually control how you want these to terminate into this fender. And then you can use, potentially you can use that beveled edge as a good starting point and then manually move things around. For this example, however, I am going to leave the crease on the hood, and I'm going to Control or Command 4 to get rid of those edges and just take a look at what we've done. So far, it's pretty impressive. We've got the majority of the hood. We obviously didn't take care of the hood scoop, but we've got the headlight openings, we've got the fender flares, we've added the wheel arches, we've controlled the transition, how it goes up into the fender, and you can see we've got that fender flare from the top, and everything is looking pretty good and pretty realistic to what the shape of this car is. As I've mentioned multiple times in here, you can spend hours and hours on these little details. So my recommendation for following a project like this is to get the majority of the shape first before you start adding these details. If you want to spend the time to get the detail on this flare, especially on a car where that flare maybe carries into the door, that can be really helpful. In the Subaru, in this specific case, that flare actually terminates just before the crease in the door. So this would end up coming back into more of a straight line here. So that back section needs some more work. Where it transitions into the mirror needs a little bit of work. It has a triangular crease or flare that happens again. And obviously the hood scoop, and then carrying the rest of this down to the bumper. Because we've done all the work up to that style line, you can very easily grab all of this, and you can use Modify Edit Form, Alt and you can begin extruding it down, and then you can come in and start adding those little details. So that's a very quick way that we can begin adding those details in there. So if you want to carry on with this model and you want to add those details, that's what I suggest you do next is you grab that bottom edge, you extrude it down, you remove the section in the front for the grill, maybe the fog lights, and add in those little details. But just keep in mind that you want to do the major shape first and then the minor shape after. At this point in time, I'm going to save this because I'm not going to do anything else on this in the video series. If you have any questions up to this point, if anything has troubled you, please let me know. This tutorial or these videos, they were not thoroughly planned through. And by that, I mean, I didn't have an exact perfect methodology that worked. I really wanted to show the process as I go through it and how I work around some of these problems. So keeping that in mind, it was a little long-winded at times, but that is the real process that I go through when I'm trying to figure out how to model something like this. So try it on your own, ask any questions that you have. If you actually go through the process of modeling the entire front end or even the entire car, I would love to see it. So if you have some progress, then please add a comment, let me know. I'd love to see your work, see if you are getting this. If this was a bit too advanced and you want a more basic forms tutorial, please let me know that as well. I'm happy to go back to a more basic form tutorial, something that is a bit beyond what I've covered in the intro series. But yeah, please let me know that as well. And as always, thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next one.